The Great Australian Dream and the broader housing crisis. It's been front and centre in the media recently, but now with the federal election due in mid-2025, it's going to be put into overdrive as the most pressing issue for Australians. Unless you've been living under a rock lately, it's already been ramping up. Just recently we had a recurring news item about scrapping negative gearing, where PM Anthony Albanese said they won't seek to scrap it because it doesn't fix housing supply. The thing about the issue of housing is that it's really complex and it took decades and a whole bunch of different factors to get to where it is today. We're going to start here because it helps frame the increasing level of frustration and hopelessness that people have. But first we're going to make a really basic definition of what the Great Australian Dream is, because this is where all sides of government have got it totally wrong. The Great Australian Dream traditionally meant owning a family home with a backyard. One could argue that in more recent times we're happy to cut out the backyard, but that's basically what it was. This has always represented financial security and social status. However, home ownership these days is changing to a point now where it's just representing the difference between the rich and the poor. My name is wbell. I'm a mortgage broker based here in Melbourne. I've been running my business since 2011, and in that time I've had front row seats to the monster of an industry that Australian property has turned into. I post this content because really I want to help people make it financially, but over the last 13 years and longer, it's clearly getting harder for the average Australian to do that. We're staying in more debt for longer, and that's putting us behind. It's really interesting that our politicians will frame this in terms of the words housing affordability. I'm going to come back to that in a bit, but first I want to show you some data. The data shows the number of homeowners with and without a mortgage, which is the blue lines, and it also shows the renters, which is the red line. The thing that's clear here is that home ownership is not getting easier. It's going the other way. Home ownership is getting harder. The reason our governments talk about housing affordability and not home ownership is that it's a sleight of hand. We've had decades of proof to show that government policies on both the left and the right have not helped the problems we have, but instead it's a fair argument to say that it's made them worse. A great example of this sleight of hand I speak about is the current government's proposed policies. The proposed Help to Buy scheme by the federal government, which will pitch in up to 40% to the purchase of a property and therefore co-own the property with the buyer. Yes, it's more affordable because the loan amount and repayment is lower, but that's not exactly the same thing as the Great Australian Dream of owning your own property. If the government owns a part of it with you, that's something else. Long term, this is pushing younger people further away from the Great Australian Dream of owning your own home. If you want to own your own home under this scheme, eventually you'll have to pay the government out their 40% share, which means going into more debt for longer later on. The definition of owning your own home previously meant not being in debt for your whole working life as well. I mean, just look at the home ownership rates. Less people are owning properties and more of them are in debt. This is a really important point because when this issue is framed as housing affordability, quite often it's a cheaper repayment, but you're in debt for longer, which creates more problems down the line. The truth is, when governments lend a hand, quite often it contributes to prices going up. If you already own a property, that's good, that's great. If not, it just makes things harder. Even the RBA said this when speaking about the grants that were given out through the pandemic times. This has resulted in many Australians being priced out, especially in places like Sydney and Melbourne. There is one big problem here, which I've already alluded to when we look at things through the frame of the Great Australian Dream. The reason I'm bringing this up is to put some context to the depth of this problem. Into debt at a later age. In the early 90s, the average first home buyer age was about 27, and now it's around 36 years old. At the same time, the debt to income ratio is rising, making it harder to pay out the debt. In global terms, our capital cities rank right up there in the most expensive cities to live. This is going to result in a retirement crisis. As of the year 2000, 63.9% of people aged 55 to 64 own their property. By 2020, that has been slashed to 36.1%. Obviously, we can't see into the future, but it doesn't look good. On a personal level, I really feel affected for the people that are copping the brunt of this, because if I was 10 years younger, maybe I would be one of those people that got priced out, or maybe I got in with a higher debt. I can understand how people would feel angry and bitter about losing out when it comes to the Great Australian Dream, because for so long that's been a part of the fabric of who we are. Having that security is one reason people immigrate here, and we were proud of that. I'm not sure Australians are as proud about their country as they once were, which is sad. We are now in a situation where people are ignoring the problem or just giving up. Basically every video about the housing crisis on YouTube on all of these topics reflect the sentiments of disillusionment, with some of the users stating they've abandoned the hope of owning a home due to the escalating property prices and the financial barriers facing these people. These comments highlight a growing sentiment among young Australians who feel that the traditional aspiration of home ownership is becoming increasingly out of reach. The reality is that as a nation, we've overspent and mismanaged ourselves to a point where the distribution of wealth has skewed to that of the rich, meaning the rich have got richer and the poor have got poorer. That is the reality of the world we live in, and this issue, which is now front and centre, will start getting used more and more as a political football. And if this happens, you can be assured that nothing will happen to turn things around. At an individual level, there's no point in ignoring problems or giving up, because it's just going to hurt you more later. The harsh truth is that if you're one of the people affected by this, you have to find a way. I know there's this theory out there that the property market is a Ponzi scheme and it will crash, and then all the people without property will be saved because they'll be able to get into the property market at a reasonable price. Whilst that could happen, I think you're better off assuming that it won't and making a plan for the worst, because the risk is you'll be forced into making a plan when it's too late. If you've got debt, an easy thing to do is to repay it as soon as possible. At least you've got some control over this. Based on my 13 years in the business, I've noticed there are some simple strategies that most people don't employ. I'm about to launch Debt Destroyer, a program designed to help people get rid of their debt as soon as possible. The truth is, most borrowers should be able to knock 5 years off their home loan if they start early enough. Do some simple math with me. If your home loan repayments are $3,000 a month and you pay your home loan off 5 years early, which is 60 months, you'll be able to save $180,000 in that time. If you're interested to join, I'll leave a link to my calendar in the description for those who want to inquire. If you're not yet on the property ladder, I really feel sorry for you. Personal debt levels, in my opinion, are dangerously high, and I think it kind of gets ignored in the crazy times that we live in. Interest rate risk, in my opinion, has a real chance of increasing, meaning I think interest rates can go higher over time. I'm not saying that will happen now, but what interest rates do is they go up and they go down. This is a hard pill to swallow because property prices are so high. Maybe the solution is having to live in a dog box apartment for a number of years till you can upgrade. Maybe it's moving somewhere more affordable. If we have high for longer inflation, it could mean higher property prices. I realize that is controversial, so let us know here in your thoughts, in your comments, if you don't agree. Anyway, high for longer inflation also means higher for longer interest rates, so it will be reasonable to take that into account when deciding to buy. If you're still here, thank you. Please subscribe if you haven't yet. If you just want to have a chat about a general conversation around finance, you can also contact me. I've had these conversations before with viewers and always enjoy it. It's not about me having a solution for you, because we are in complicated times and everyone's different. It's just about having a chat and basically having a sounding board for someone to work off.